All right, well, welcome everyone to our November 2020 Brown Bag here at Violence Free Colorado. My name is Brandy Walega. I'm actually filling in for Liz Stewie today, who's not feeling well, but we are going to we're joined by some wonderful staff by Alternatives to Violence in Loveland, so they'll introduce themselves a little bit later. I'm going to talk a little bit about what belongs in the survivor file, do kind of a quick overview of the super not so fun stuff, but important things. And then the staff from Alternatives to Violence is going to talk about their experiences and talk more about the changes that their organization went through. And so hopefully we'll have a lot of great information. You guys might have some great questions as we move along. So we're gonna go ahead and get started, and I'll let you know that we are recording this webinar. And also again, feel free to type your name and organization in the chat box. And if you'd like everybody to see that, please select all panelists and attendees from the drop-down menu. So that way then you're sharing that with all the folks on the webinar. All right, so today, my little part is going to be in the introduction here. We're going to cover a few different topics, talking about what are the laws and requirements related to client or survivor files, what are some best practices for using client files to support advocacy, what are some of the practical realities of making changes to how a program uses client files. So for this first part, feel free, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type those in the chat box as I move through these first slides, and I will go ahead and answer those as they pop up. And apologies, my mouse is a little finicky these days. So wanting to look at, really what goes in client or survivor files and what are clients' rights. So ultimately, survivors are allowed to access their file. They're allowed to see a copy of their file and to know that they have the right to have that. Survivors also have the power to determine what information that they want to share, like what do they want to share that goes in the file, and what do they want to share perhaps as we look at confidentiality through a release and whatnot. All of those are determined by the survivor. And organizations actually can't make information required to be put in a file or required for service access. So that's something important to remember, that again, there's never any requirements that a survivor has to say or share a specific piece of information in order to get services and for that to be put in the file. And as I mentioned with confidentiality, there's releases of information. There's also exceptions to confidentiality. And when we look at community-based advocates, then that's what that's going to look like, as we know, is going to be, the mandatory reporting of known or suspected child abuse and neglect. If someone has a different role within your organization outside of being community-based advocate, then those exceptions to confidentiality will look a little bit different. And then also in terms of survivor files, we want to look at any accommodations that a survivor is needing in order to access that, including language access. So a survivor would know what information is actually recorded in their file and what it says for them. And so thinking about the things that we should put in survivor files. Types of services provided, what things are a survivor requesting and receiving, and then also recording those dates of contact, and also referrals provided. That's helpful for tracking things along around what survivors, what resources are needed and what resources are being accessed. So pretty simple. And things that shouldn't be in a client file. Again, these are going to be best practices. So when we think about, client files and survivor files overall, the goal is really to have the least amount of information possible that is needed in order to serve that survivor. So, we don't want to put any information about other survivors or other clients in files. We don't want to put any assumptions or judgment calls in a survivor's file, because that doesn't have anything to do with them accessing services. We want only things that are, really to the point and observable objectively. We don't want to include observations about parenting or behavior. Again, some survivors might be concerned about what what could happen to their file? Could it be subpoenaed? And we know that advocates do hold privilege in Colorado, and at the same time, it doesn't mean files aren't subpoenaed on the regular. A lot of times they're quashed, which is really important, but it makes sense that survivors might be concerned about what things are actually going into the file. So we also we don't need to have details about advocates. Sometimes it's just the first name or initials about which advocate is working with that survivor and what service was provided. Same thing with, in a shelter setting, for example, information about conflicts and group living situations. Again, those things are going to come up, and that's a normal, natural part of group living. And at the same time, is that something that's necessary in someone's file? And we'll talk about maybe where else that could go in just a minute. Details about a survivor that aren't necessary for the person to receive services, so as I mentioned, and also information a survivor doesn't want to be shared or included in a file. One quick thing I'll say about that is that, I worked with someone once who was really nervous about potentially her file being subpoenaed. It never was when we worked together, but she was really concerned about that. So she was concerned about, putting a very specific piece of information in her file, and that was basically like how many times that she had been married and divorced. She didn't want that in the file, and so I respected that. I knew it in my head, but it was fine, and it was really it was her choice. And even though it was never subpoenaed, again, it's okay to respect, even if we're not really sure why someone might really want that or need that. So as I mentioned, there's some other tools, and these are usually used more in a shelter setting or group living setting. When we think about maybe an advocate log or an emergency incident log, the goal of these kinds of communication tools is communication between advocates. So ultimately, it's not something that these don't go in a survivor file. These are protected work products of advocates. They're not part of any survivor record. So ultimately, if you're thinking like, hey, there was a conflict about something in the shelter, maybe we want to make sure that we put that in an advocate log. These types of logs should be confidentially disposed of on a regular basis, every week or two, whatever your organization has set up as protocol. And these can also be supervision tools, or whether that's group or individual supervision. Talking about what advocates do in a shift, for example, and in a shelter situation. So ultimately, when we think about communication with information about survivors, this can help really track some things. So ultimately, that is the intro part. So I just threw a ton of information at y'all. Do you have any questions about the things like, again, the nitty-gritty law stuff, regulation stuff, or best practices about the things that go in the files? Because the staff from ATV, they're going to really kind of talk a little bit more about how it looks in practice. So not seeing any questions. So if we want to go ahead and switch out, Amanda, do you want to go ahead and share your screen? So I'm here with Amanda, Pergita, Jillian, and Emily from Alternatives to Violence up in Loveland, and they are going to talk about their experiences.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Amanda Mitchell. I am the volunteer and training manager at Alternatives to Violence in Loveland. So thank you for having us today. We're very excited to present this to you. And I've been at ATV almost 2 years. So I came in about the time our new executive director, Carrie Clark, came in. And that's when a lot of these changes started going into place and being implemented. So I was very fortunate to be on the cusp of that coming in. I am going to share my screen with you now. There we go. Can everyone see that? Okay. All right, wonderful. So what I like to do is I like to just initially talk about who we are in case you don't know, and it looks like we have people from all over the state here. So who is ATV and what do we do? We were actually started 38 years ago in a basement of a local church here in Loveland, and we have grown so much over the last 38 years, But our safe house did not open till the year 2016. So I like to point that out at the very beginning, that even though we're kind of a veteran agency, our safe house is in the toddler stage. So this was great for us to be able to do, because we have a lot of staff that they're new and they're enthusiastic and very focused on implementing these new ideas. So I like to start with our mission statement. That tells you everything you need to know about ATV pretty much. But it states, alternatives to violence provide shelter, advocacy, education, and resources for people impacted by domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. So we actually work with all victims of crime, but we specialize in and specify in these three areas the most. Of those, probably 85 to 90% of our clients are going to be domestic violence. So we would see more domestic violence than anything else, but we do see sexual assault and human trafficking as well. We do work closely with SAVA, which is Sexual Assault Victims Advocacy here in Loveland and Fort Collins, and also with the Avery Center for Human Trafficking. They were previously Free Our Girls. Our vision statement is, we envision a safe community free from domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. One other note I like to mention is we work with everyone at ATV, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, age, physical disabilities, anything. So we will work with that client regardless of any of those things. So what do we do at ATV? We like to talk about it in an SOS fashion, and the first S stands for safety. So for safety for our clients, we have several alternatives. We have a 24-hour crisis line, which most safe houses do have. We have emergency shelter. So we have an 8-room, 22-bed shelter that individuals can stay up to 8 weeks in if they are fleeing imminent danger. And we also offer support services for victims of violent crime in an emergency setting. We have a memorandum of understanding on MOU with Loveland Police Department, and they actually do call us out on scene for domestic violence or intimate partner violence calls. We also respond to local hospitals for sexual assault calls as well. So that's what our safety looks like. For options, we have advocacy and support. When our clients are with us, we are working on an advocacy model because it's short-term crisis intervention, and that's what advocacy is about. We are also offering support in the way of resources or just listening and sitting with our clients in that moment. We have adult and child programs, which we are working with. We actually have a brand new child advocate, which is exciting, and she's kind of redoing and revamping our child program. So we're really excited to see that. And for our stability, we offer community education. This is one example of that community education, what we're doing today. Another example of that is we will just hold what we call a community education for, say, Domestic Violence 101. And anyone in the community could join us for that. We have a housing program, and we have a brand new non-residential residential coordinator who is over our housing program. We're very excited about that. She's probably housed 5 to 10 people in the last 3 weeks. It's insane, super exciting. We also offer support groups, which I know all of you are like, how are you offering support groups with COVID? So that is something that we're just now getting back into, and we're going to be doing it online, virtually. It's still hard. Yes, we know that connection sometimes still isn't the same, but it's offering that support that our clients need. And then we have non-residential support and advocacy as well that we are offering. So our clients we work with both non-residential and residential clients. Last year, we offered resources or assistance to 1,397 individuals. Only 164 of those were in our safe house. So as you can see, we have quite a few non-residential individuals. And we also offer life skills training, whether that is working on resumes or talking about job interview prep or whatever it is. We want to offer those types of things to our clients as well. One thing I like to mention before we talk about training of advocates is, what do you look for when you're looking at hiring an advocate? What should that look like? And people have different opinions on different strengths and weaknesses and things like that. But one thing we always say is, if they have these three main pillars, they can be successful in advocacy. And those three are self-care, which is huge, boundaries, and empathy. If a person that you're interviewing has those three qualities, it's likely they would make a good advocate. Now, that's not the only qualities they need to have, but those three is kind of that cornerstone piece, okay? When we talk about training, All of our advocates, all of our staff, all of our volunteers, and all of our interns go through the same type of training to begin. So that is very helpful too, because everyone kind of gets that first initial inspection of what we do and how we work with our clients. So we work through Domestic Violence 101, Sexual Assault 101, and Human Trafficking 101, because those are the three main areas that we look at. We also talk about the legal and criminal justice system. In that, we're talking not just about what it looks like in maybe a domestic violence case, but what does that look like for the unauthorized practice of law? What does that look like for confidentiality? What does that look like for mandated reporting? So we're going to go through all of that. We talk about children and trauma, not just the children that we see with the adults at the safe house, but how our adults were probably victims or children in trauma, and they may have ACE identifiers, and that stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So we're going to look at those. We talk about diversity and inclusion. If we are going to work with everyone, we need to be open and make sure that we are watching our biases and judgments and things like that. ATV needs to be a judgment-free zone. We all have unconscious or implicit biases. We know this. So being aware of those and taking proactive ways to get rid of some of those biases is always great. Self-care. Self-care is huge. When I first started in this field, I was like, they make such a big deal about self-care. Self-care is huge. I mean, if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of others. That's just the bottom line. And then we finish out with crisis intervention and advocacy. So the goal is we spend 18 hours together in this training, and this is to teach us who we work with and how we work with them through crisis intervention and advocacy. So this is not a training where you're going to fill out a piece of paper or you're going to learn what we do on this type of log in the safe house. This is where you learn who we work with. From here, we offer expanded trainings, and from there, they learn more of those operational skills. I always like to say that empathy, self-care, and boundaries, super important. And also all of our trainings are going to be open to our community, okay? How do we help? Several different ways. The basic ones, and this sounds very simple, but this is so true. Listen, empower, believe. Sometimes you are the first person who has looked at a client and said, wow, that's not okay. You don't deserve that. No one deserves to be treated like that. You could be the first person to validate them. And with that comes empowerment, okay? Our focus at ATV, confidentiality, obviously, these are our utmost concerns of our clients. Trauma-informed care approach, and the safety of our clients. So those are the ways we work, and we are working through this with our clients through these basic pieces. Now I would like to take a moment to introduce Pragita Thapa. Pragita is our Safe House Manager. She's amazing. And before we begin with her piece, I didn't mention this at the beginning, but we are going to hold questions to the end. So if you want to put a question in the chat box, that's great. We will answer those at the end of the training. Okay, Pragita.
Perfect. Thank you, Amanda. Hello, my name is Pragita Thapa, and I am the Safe House Manager for Alternatives to Violence. First of all, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today in this webinar, and we're very glad to have you all over here. But before I dive into the presentation, I would like to summarize a little bit about what we will be talking and covering with our points. So my presentation is more from a supervisor's standpoint. I will be talking more about when and how did we start to practice trauma-informed care policies or program, and what were the challenges that we face? What did the transitional process look like for us, and where do we stand right now? What have been the outcomes? Whereas we have our two lovely case managers, Emily and Jillian, they will be talking more about the practical day-to-day use of the policy and what it is like to work 40 hours frontline while tackling those policies, and the feedbacks that they've been receiving from the clients as well as their team members. So without any delay, I would like to start my presentation by saying that we absolutely understand that every organization is structured differently, and you all might be having different policies for a reason. So hopefully the points that we share here today are somewhat helpful for all of you. And if there's any questions, my email address was on the first slide, but feel free to email me, or you can even ask Brandy for my email address and she would be able to give it to you. Thank you, Amanda. So where and how did alternative surveillance start practicing trauma-informed care? It was 2 years back that Carrie Clark had joined as our new executive director. And I still remember the time that when in the initial first period of time, me and Carrie were doing back-to-back, meetings and catching up on how things are running in the safe house. What are the challenges that we are seeing in the front line as well as with clients? And during that time, I think we really reviewed and saw that a lot of our practices and policies were not truly aligning with the full potential of what a trauma-informed care program could be and should be. So I think with that, it was an eye-opening moment for all of us because trust me, we all believed that we were doing our best and we thought that we were actually practicing trauma-informed care to the best knowledge that we have. And I think, about trauma-informed care, it is so easy to understand the concept and, to know what trauma-informed care is for majority of us. But the real challenge and the struggle is actually practicing them and putting in a daily life and using them with client services. That would be the biggest challenge. So we took that opportunity to really review, evaluate, and update each of our policies, handbooks, and client folders. And during that time, we invested our time to figure out what was the benefit that each of the form, documentation, or the policy holding, not only for the agency, but also for the client. So, just to give you a heads up that this process can be a long process. For me and Carrie, it took us almost about 2 months to get everything finalized, up and running. And, we would sit on meetings for like 3-4 times and we would not have an answer that me and Carrie both would struggle with answer. And Carrie would end up calling her supervisor. Then we would be in a group call trying to figure out. So it can be a process that, you'll have to spend time, but I think every time that you spend is definitely worth at the end when it comes to client services. While getting update to the right practices of trauma-informed care program, confidentiality of the client was definitely the top priority for our agency. We started with release of information form, which is also known as ROI form, because I think it is so important to truly understand the power that the form holds. And it's not only for the clients, but also for the advocates. When a client is signing that form, they are trusting you and your agency that you will be sharing the information with the best practices that it will benefit their situation. So for us, we were, really not wanting to jeopardize that relationship with our client. So we had a lot of trainings. We were setting very clear boundaries on when and how our agency would be using release of information here onwards. But also, just updating little things like thanking the client for trusting us and signing an ROI has definitely helped us build relationship with our clients throughout the services that we've provide. We worked very diligently on maintaining documentation and client folders with confidentiality that, like Brandy said, even if by 1% of chance that we were taken to court, we didn't want any personal information of the client to be disclosed. And one of the best training examples that I think I got from my supervisor was like, Pragita, think about it like, for example, a mom is trying to fight the custody of her child in court. And her ex-partner is trying to win the custody. So think about what you're putting in the file. Would it affect how that procedure would go for a client? First of all, like, putting stuff or documentation like the mom is not with the kid. It was our supervision that the kid was left attended. Or, we're talking about mom had a lot of mental health needs and this is what we provided, this is what happened, or even talking about substance dependency. When it goes to court, and if it does by 1%, that it does go to court, first of all, we're breaking confidentiality 100% because we promise the client that when you come to our services, when you are taking our services, everything that you get over here and everything that happens within this shelter stays confidential. So first of all, we broke the confidentiality because now everything is out there, what she was doing, what she was, having issues with her kids or with our policy. And the second is that, we want to think it of like, would it hamper the client's case when they're going to court? Like everything that we're documenting for a survivor would have, worked the other way around and probably would have made more pro cases for the person who's trying to fight custody for her child. So those were very important things that we thought about. And I think we really use it on our training tools. staff log, which we also call as staff documentation. We might have different names for it, but that was definitely one of the most challenging documentation that we worked to really get everyone on the same page, because we do understand staff log is something that, all the shifts have to use, because they're putting information about what happened on the shift, updates about the client, as well as, it has an abundance of information. I think we're storing for at least a month or a week, depending how you're storing your staff log. But during the initial period of time, we did a lot of one-on-one training. I was reviewing staff log for almost 6 to 8 months on a daily basis, just to make sure that everyone was on the same page. And if you ask about what the outcome is now, it is great. Like, we only put facts and information that the next shift really needs to know about. There is no personal comments or judgments in our staff log. We only keep staff log for current and the past month. And I still do check staff log every month twice, and I send positive feedbacks as well as suggestions, because I think it's so important for advocates to know how wonderful job they're doing on maintaining that part of the documentation. So my suggestion for any organization that is trying to re-update their staff log policies, or trying to change things in staff log, you really need to have an open conversation with your team, and sitting down and having the conversation of what is the relevance of keeping the staff log for months or years, if your organization is still practicing that. Frontline is always busy. Is your advocate really getting the time to jump into a staff log 2 years back if a caller says, yes, I did take a service from you guys in 2018? And the main thing is the circumstances and situation changes so drastically for a survivor, and it changes within a day. So what is the helpful reason behind keeping a staff log and tracking the old staff log, if a survivor is truly calling you back for services? And one of the hardest conversation that it is to have about staff log, but that really needs to happen is, is keeping or storing staff log for so long creating a bias for your organization? At least on behalf of ATV, I can say that not storing staff log for so long has helped us remove our bias. But at the same time, we've opened a very open communication platform where advocates can talk very freely about biases and triggers. We looked at very alternative methods of, instead of putting everything in staff log, whether it was in person of exchanging information or different methods of communication. We really worked on building our on-call team and a backup team. I still review the client files and intake files, exit files, so that, I can make sure that the policies and the documentation are being practiced well. And one of the things is being transparent and explaining the reason behind the policies and why we have them. It is so important, not only just for advocates to understand, but even for the clients, so that, they're understanding where we're coming from. And no one is felt leaving like, again, this is back to power and control wheel cycle, what I'm feeling. So those were the things and challenges that we worked on. And if you ask me, what did the transition process look like for alternatives to violence? We did have some turnover of the staff. So, my suggestion for shelter managers or supervisors who works on calendars, be prepared for coverages. Personally for me, I did my calendar in advance so that I could take any open shifts. And as a supervisor, you just have to be prepared. It might be a whole month or two before you hire the right individual. So you'll probably be doing a lot of, morning, evening, overnight shift, and taking a lot of on-call as well. So that was one of, calendar-wise, the fun fact that I worked on. And I think, for us, it was very important that we were very clear from the beginning with our expectations, from the time that we interview to the time that we hire and settle an individual in. So for me and Carrie, I would say our question is heavily focused during the interview time on, what are your thoughts on substance dependency and mental health? And once, we get an answer from them, we say, this is what our expectation is, and this is what we provide as a service. Can you work the front line with all those policies? So even during the hire time, we're reminding them again. When it's in Amanda's training, she's reminding again. So it's a reminder that, we are telling you where we stand, and is this something that you are making a choice that you can work? So I think that has been very important for us, but also being flexible with advocate schedule. When you're working with trauma-informed informed care policies. You know, there's like triggers or mental health day that they cannot plan in advance and tell you in advance. So having a good grip on coverages and calendars is very important. We hired 2 case managers so that they could solely focus on just client progress and how things are going for the client. When case managers are overloaded or would need a backup, I do case management still. And this way that even if one of my case managers is out on vacation or calls in sick, the client is not delayed in service. And on top of that, the client would not have to be re-traumatized by sharing the whole incident with me from the start. So this has definitely helped us with doing back-to-back case management, or at least having backup for case management. Supervisor positions are always busy. We have 100 things going around with, taking care of the safe house. But, for me and Carrie, we always make a point that we're meeting every individual in the safe house just to catch up and say, hey, how are things going for you? And for us, like I think again, me and Carrie, it is so important that we process and, get updated about the client situations on every other day basis, so that, especially right now when we're staggering advocates, who's going to be here and who's not going to be here, it's easy for the advocate and the case manager to just find one of us and just catch up, right where they left, without having to spend another 30 minutes about giving the background history of that. So those were all what transitional process looked like and the challenges that we really worked on. But, I think everyone is curious to know, what does the outcome look like and where does ATV stand right now? So the feedbacks from the clients have been very warm, that, they feel happy and welcomed in our program. The client success rate, whether it is getting mental health needs met, emotionally stable, jobs, housing, self-sufficiency has definitely increased. And we are tracking all of this through our client survey feedback, as well as our grant manager. He pulls up statistic every month to let us know how we're doing. And the feedbacks from the client honestly have been the best, where they have always said, we felt like home. At ATV, we felt like home. And, to be honest, I think that was one of our biggest struggle and challenge when we were in our transitional process, because the advocacy approach during the transitional time for ATV, it was more of like, this is not a home for a client. They need to get on self-sufficiency, start finding jobs and, housing right away. And I think right now our present advocacy approach is focus on trauma, focus on healing, make sure that they feel like home while they're working the self-sufficiency program. And I think the clients can absolutely see that. And our team has been able to achieve that in a very smooth manner, transitioning through with trauma-informed care policy. For advocates, interns and volunteers, we have seen a tremendous amount of growth from where we started to where we are today. They are very, everyone is very, very engaging on critical thinking and how we can best support the clients. At the same time, they're very self-independent, that they don't call me and Carrie to process everything. They're making decisions on their own. So that has been very, very strong point with our trauma-informed care policy. They are definitely more empathetic and understanding about client situation, whether it is about mental health or about substance dependency that they're talking about. And I think the biggest thing is that they're able to distinguish between feeling uncomfortable versus feeling unsafe. And for all of us who've worked frontline, we know this is the tricky part that gets us. So I think it is really important for every organization to understand, are you unsafe or are you uncomfortable? It's something that we always have a conversation about. And there is consistency, consistency from the time of hiring, training with Amanda and me, and then actually working the front line with the advocates. The newcomers are just getting one consistent answer in what we do. So that has helped everyone to be just on the same page and follow our trauma-informed care program. And I think the best part, honestly, is the advocates are able to share their feedback to me and Carrie, honestly, with, with very open mind. And there will be some days that, as a supervisor, you're now making a decision like, okay, we've already had a conversation with the client 3 or 4 times with one of the policy being broken. And the advocates will come and say, Carrie and Pragita, before you guys decide, I want to advocate that this is the reason the client should work, because this is what they're going to achieve if they get a chance to work. And I think that is the best feeling as a supervisor, that you get that your advocates are advocating for a client, even if you know that they're struggling with following a couple of your policies. You know, we are with the mentality of we're not a police over here. We're not officers over here trying to, you know, correct someone. We want to support in any ways that we can. So I think that has definitely been the best feedback from the advocates that we get. But I think above and all, we just love Carrie's advice. And every time Carrie's best advice to us is that exiting someone from the program is never a solution. You know, what you basically are doing is just passing them from one community resource to another community resource, which is never a solution for a client, nor for any community resources. So she says, really think about what can you do to help this person. And if there is anything that we can do, we will do everything in our power to make sure that the survivor gets the best services that they can. And, you know, honestly, as supervisors, we know that working with trauma-informed care policies and working the front line is always not rainbows and butterflies. You know, and especially while practicing trauma-informed care program, like Amanda always says, it's so like I was training, but when I was in the front line, Pragita, I had to catch myself. So, you know, we do understand that it's not easy, but we are very honest from the beginning that they will be good days. There will be bad days, and there are going to be tough days, you know, but the main message that we convey is that we will be right there with you, and you would never have to handle a crisis situation alone. So if there is an absolute crisis situation in the house that, you know, the on-call staff member is already there with an advocate, Carrie and I will always make sure one of us is right there in the front line working the crisis situation with them, so that not only the client, but also our advocate gets the best support during the time of that. So that has been the feedback and outcome of where we stand. But we have Emily, who will be talking a little bit about how we maintain our client files and confidentiality.
Thank you, Pragita. Hello, all. My name is Emily. I'm a case manager, and I work with our clients directly for about 40 hours each week. I began my work with ATV as a relief advocate right as these changes were beginning to be implemented. So I've witnessed the reaction of other staff, the subsequent turnover, and I'm here to share how we work to maintain the confidentiality of our clients after settling into this transition. The main thing I'm going to discuss with you today is one of the most significant ways we work to maintain confidentiality, and that is through documentation. I'm going to first address our physical client files, which we are keeping very minimal these days with no paperwork from external sources, including medical, legal, employment, or housing information. Additionally, we are no longer storing printed records of staff log, and we do not have a warning log. We do have a conversation log with no concrete rules behind it. Clients have the right to review their file, as you know, so we want to be conscientious of the kind of language we're using within that file out of respect for our clients and, of course, for court purposes. As for case management notes, they are only stored in our highly secure and web-based software program. And moving on to releases of information, ROIs, they are always optional for our clients. They can be revoked at any time, and they are only dated for the time frame in which they are needed. Even with a signed ROI, our agency can only provide yes or no answers. For example, if we speak with a probation officer that we have a signed ROI for, we absolutely understand that they are doing their job, but we can only verify that the individual is currently a client of ours and encourage them to speak with the client directly if they're in need of any additional information. We do not include any ROIs for other shelters to help preserve the confidentiality of our clients, but we do assist them with silent support and provide them with tools to advocate for themselves. By maintaining confidentiality with other shelters, it is up to the other shelters to use what criteria they feel is appropriate when determining if a caller would be a good match for their services. And this removes the potential for an advocate from our organization from sharing something that would determine whether or not a person receives those services. Moving on to staff log documentation, we use objective language only, which was touched on, and limit what we document to advocacies that have been already completed and other general staff updates such as client completed case management and mover survey, for example. We do not keep track of donations in the staff log, and instead they are recorded in our web-based program under a donations category. Additionally, we do not have a red flag list, but our training material for the new Safe House advocates includes examples of instances that have happened in the safe house so that all of our new staff are made aware of previous situations and clients so that they know how to answer crisis calls and what to process with the safe house manager. We do understand that there may be questions about substance use and mental health, and here are some of the examples of how we would go about documenting those instances. If drugs or paraphernalia are found in the client's room, it would be documented as items not in compliance with ATV policy were found in room 5. Client had a conversation with their case manager and resources were provided. However, if there were to be an ongoing issue resulting in a scheduled exit conversation, it would be simply documented as staff had a conversation with the client and they were connected to resources. The client is scheduled to meet with the safe house manager in the morning. Now, depending on the severity of the situation, staff will then formulate a backup plan with the safe house manager. And we formulate different options depending on the level of severity. If a person is working on mental health or sobriety, that plan can include holding a room if the client is in need of mental health services or a detox. When a client exits our program, we keep our exit notes to the bare minimum. For example, if a client were to go to another safe house, we would document that as client relocated to a safe place. If the client were to secure an apartment or other type of long-term housing, we would document that as client transition to long-term housing. This type of language allows us to keep track of our stats in terms of which clients did find housing while preserving their confidentiality. Additionally, we would document that the client is welcome back to our program, and it is exceedingly rare that there's an exception to that because we want those clients to have a second chance and to be able to receive our services in the future. We use confidential emails to relay sensitive information to other staff, and our confidential mode emails are set to about 1 week expiration dates so that all staff have the opportunity to stay up to date. Our emails are written in a professional manner and kept brief. For follow-ups on clients' progress or if staff need to be on the lookout for an abuser, secure email has been the best method for establishing that line of communication. And beyond the realm of documentation, ATV works to help victims maintain their confidentiality while receiving services that help them keep safe by connecting them with a McKinney-Vento liaison through the school district who can help with the swift enrollment process for children attending a new school, and also help develop a safety plan for the family revolving around the child's school schedule. And once our clients do secure housing, they're able to work with our non-residential advocate to become a participant in the Colorado Address Confidentiality Program, which provides survivors with a legal substitute address and a mail forwarding service. And thank you so much for your time. And just to wrap up, I just wanted to say that improving methods for maintaining confidentiality is an ever-evolving process, and we absolutely welcome feedback on how your organization maintains confidentiality so that we can work together to maintain the highest standards for our clients. That's the goal. Communication within the organization is vital, and our other case manager, Jillian, will now share a little bit with you about the mechanics of how our team operates.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everyone. My name is Jillian. I've been with Alternatives to Violence as a case manager for about 1.5 years now. I was actually probably one of the first interviews that they were very upfront about during the interview that we will be working with substance abuse issues and mental health issues, things like that. So I was really lucky to be at the forefront of all of these new changes and learning how all these things would look with everyone else. I'm going to be talking a little bit about some key components that have worked for us in implementing all of these changes smoothly on the front line in the safe house. So communication is really a big component to our success with all of these things. And communication with staff, we really prioritize having a safe place of trust within our staff that anyone can feel comfortable to talk about anything. And as Emily discussed, we do keep our documentation very minimal, especially with staff log. And a big reason about why we can do that is our in-person processing. So when our safe house manager makes our schedule, she builds in an overlap time between every shift so that you can sit down and discuss with the next advocate, hey, this is what happened on my shift. This is what you'll need to know going into yours. And that really helps us keep that documentation minimal. We're also we also take pride in being able to openly talk about things with our coworkers. So being able to openly talk about things like bias and triggers is really important to best helping our clients. Being able to come to another staff member and say, hey, this client, I've been working with them for a month now and they need a gift card. I don't think I should decide if they get a gift card. I think I'm a little biased at this point. Or to say, I can't work with this client because it's bringing up a lot of stuff for me. It's really important to be able to discuss that with your staff members and have other staff members step in to make sure that that client still gets the best help that we can give. Communication within staff is very important, but it's also very important with clients. It's just as important to create a safe space of trust and open-mindedness and no judgment with clients. We're really trying to work more on being honest with them about our policies. We used to just tell them, hey, your kid's not with you. I need your kid with you in the room at all times. Hey, I need your kid with you in the room at all times. We actually probably got a little annoying about it, but what we're trying to do better now is to sit down with them and say, hey, we need your child with you at all times because we don't background check everyone that comes in the safe house, and we want to make sure that your child's safe. So to really give them that reasoning behind things has been very beneficial, and it helps with meeting them with empathy, because if we were in that position, we would want to know the reasoning behind some of these rules as well. And in return, they do give you that communication back too. Sometimes I'll be in the safe house at night and get a call at like 9 p.m. and the client calls me and he says, I'm out with friends, I've had a few drinks, I'm going to take an overnight and not come back to the safe house tonight. If the client tells me that, I'm honestly just going to thank them. I'm going to thank them for being honest with us and for respecting our policies. And we do still maintain boundaries, so depending on the case, we might have a conversation about it tomorrow, but really that open communication does go both ways, and it really helps to build that relationship with the client. We've also found it very beneficial to increase our backup support here at ATV. We are trying to be more aware of each other's strengths, of each team member's strengths, so that we can best utilize them in different situations. We had, for example, a Christmas event last year that luckily all hands were on deck because it was a Christmas event, but a crisis did come up with a client, and that client was not responding well to every staff member, and certain personalities in our staff weren't something she was willing to work with at that time. So we as a staff had to be able to say, okay, these teammates need to step back and these teammates need to step forward and help address this situation, so that we're meeting the client where they're at more. Especially in those crisis situations. We're also very lucky to have the staff and the funding to have a lot of on-shift backup. Our morning advocate, she normally has a lot of administrative staff that can jump in if a crisis situation does come up to help out. And now we actually have swing shifts in the evening as well. So now there's 2 people on most evening shifts in case any situation does come up that we don't see. There's also certain tasks that we only do with at least 2 staff members. Things like going into client rooms, doing intakes, certain situations that you don't really know what to expect, we'll only do with 2 staff members. And say we have a late night intake, at that point, if you're alone on site, our on-call advocate will come in and you'll still have 2 people to do that intake no matter what time it is. So we do have a great on-call procedure. So even if you are on site alone, you're never really alone. You always have backup. All of our on-call advocates are within a 30-minute response time of the safe house. And our on-call advocate, if they ever need backup, they can call our safe house manager. If she ever needs backup, they can call our executive director. And there have definitely been situations when all of those people have been involved in handling a situation. So it's really important for us to have that backup. And it's been really helpful in a lot of different situations. I would really like to emphasize too that how we do things is not the only way to do them. We've just seen through our outcomes that this is what works for us. We've seen a lot of change in how clients are responding to us. We recently had an exit actually with a woman that we needed to exit for mental health reasons and substance abuse reasons. And I sat down with her in the exit conversation and she actually thanked me. She thanked all of us for giving her those chances and giving her the opportunity to try to get back on track and to try to deal with those issues on her own before just having to exit her. So we're seeing a lot of changes in that. We've actually really, through everything, we've found that less rules and more trauma-informed care is leading to a lot more self-sufficiency, because we're actually, through doing that, we're holding them accountable to themselves more so than we're holding them accountable to us. We're very lucky, we haven't had a very rough exit in about a year. I'll knock on wood because it's still crisis work and you never know. But I think a big part of that is that they're understanding us more. We're giving them those chances, and we're having those conversations with them, so that by the time, if an exit conversation does need to be had, they're not as surprised. We're also seeing a lot of past clients coming back when they still need help, because we're trying very hard to leave that door open by addressing issues with them without judgment and with an open mind. So we're seeing a lot of people come back and still feel comfortable to come back to us for help when they do need it. So boiled down, I think a lot of our success as an agency is through teamwork. Teamwork within our staff and teamwork within us and the clients, because we are on their team. And again, I would really just encourage you to all sit down with your team and discuss what procedures and what policies best work for you guys and your staff and your team and who you work with. Because again, this is not a one size fits all, but we have found a size that works pretty well for us. So that's all we have here, and I'm gonna wrap it up and open it up to any questions anyone might have. And thank you all for joining us today. I have seen a few questions pop up in the chat already. Let's see. We do have a question. What online platform are you using for your support groups?
It's doxy.me, doxy.me. That is the platform we are using.
Awesome. And it looks like someone asked, is your staff log physical document or electronic? And I don't know if Emily did mention this, but it is digital. It's electronic. Another one is, how do your policies relate to client data kept in Cafe or other databases if you use a different one?
I mean, I can try to answer, but our probably grant manager would be an excellent person to answer this. But everything is very secured. We keep all of even in Apricot, he's always telling us keep a very bare minimum information. I do not need to know the whole story. All I just need to know is I can count the statistics. So we try to put very minimum information. Whatever we're practicing in the client file is the same way that we go with our electronic data tracking as well. So no personal information are disclosed again. Yeah, I think I can't see any other questions.
If there's, anyone that has any other questions at this time, just let us know. I think the big pieces that we wanted to point out too was it takes a team. It takes a positive team and working together, and this is going to take time, and it's not that ours works for everybody. I think we've been really good to say this works for us and it may not work for you, but it does work really well for us. So just encouraging your agency to maybe sit and brainstorm some ideas and talk about these things, because we haven't always been on the same page. Like, this took time, it's not something that just happens overnight. It took a lot of conversations, and really what you need to think about when you're going in is your intent. What is your intent? What is your purpose for those conversations? So thank you. Anyone else want to have anything else?
No, I think we're pretty much wrapped up with our points.
Well, while we're hanging out to see if folks have any questions, so again, feel free to type questions for the ATV staff in the box. I just want to remind you all, first off, thank you all, because you did a wonderful presentation. I thought that it was really amazing, all of the information you shared, and really clear, and a great work, just awesome work. Geez, wow, great team. I want to remind you all that our next brown bag webinar will be in December, and it'll be on December 8th. And I'll have a couple folks from the Address Confidentiality program, as well as Colorado Legal Services, and they're going to be talking about supporting survivors in family court with some COVID considerations and ACP participants. So be on the lookout later this week for that information going out. It doesn't look like we have any more questions, so it is okay if we want to wrap up a few minutes early. Again, thank you so much for everyone who's attended and asked questions. We will send out, I'll check with the ATV staff if they want to send out their PowerPoint, and we'll share that with everyone and get that information out later on this week. And thank you so much. You guys are amazing staff and wonderful presentation. We got some thank yous coming in the chat. Great. Awesome. Lots of thank yous.
Last piece, if anyone would be interested in seeing any of the pieces of our training, I do open our training, like I said, to everyone. So if you are interested, my email is amanda.mitchell@alternativestoviolence.org. I'll put it in the chat for you now.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. Awesome. Lots of thank yous. Great. Okay. Wonderful. And if folks need an ATV staff email or connection, feel free to contact me as well. We can always make sure that that happens. Again, thank you to everyone who participated, and great thanks to Alternatives to Violence staff. And we'll hope to see some of you next month at our next Brown Bag webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brandy.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.